Welcome to Humble Beginnings, the Undrafted podcast. I'm your host, Rochelle Hamilton Jr. And man, I gotta tell you, I'm loving the way the rebranding of this podcast is going. Man, it's like a breath of fresh air. Like, I love the way it's been restacked. Got a lot more subject matter. We got a lot going on the show today. We've got the Urban Meyer suspension reaction. Paxton Lynch was booed by Broncos fans. Khalil Mack, he's reportedly on the trade block. I don't know what's going on with that situation there. The Redskins, they signed Adrian Peterson. NFL, they're not changing this crazy helmet rule that they kind of just whisked into action over the offseason. Some anonymous coach called Nick Saban a cheater. So we got a lot going on the show today, a lot to get to. So let's just go ahead and get into it. Urban Meyer, this situation right here is extremely sad, and it's one that should have basically everybody upset. Urban Meyer was suspended 3 games by Ohio State for his handling of domestic violence allegations against his former assistant coach, Zach Smith, who's accused of abusing his ex-wife, Courtney Smith, on multiple occasions. Take a listen at part of this press conference. Here's what I have to say about this deal. This ruling is a joke. This punishment is a flat-out joke. That press conference was a joke. There was not an ounce of contrition or empathy from anybody up on that panel at that press conference. I've done my fair share of press conferences and school board meetings and you know, things of that nature, city council meetings. I've covered my fair share of that, and I've seen school board meetings that had more emotion. I've seen city council meetings that had more emotion than this press conference. Urban Meyer's apology was a joke. Athletic director Gene Smith's apology was a joke. You know, what Ohio State tried to do, they tried to please everybody, but in the end, they pissed everybody off. Because first of all, none of these guys at this press conference, nobody, not President Drake, not athletic director Gene Smith, not Urban Meyer, none of these dudes apologized to Courtney Smith, who, of course, was the one that received the worst end out of this entire situation. Instead, they all started off their spiels, if you want to call it that. They started off their spiels with apologizing to Buckeye Nation, the marketing scheme that Ohio State has given to its fan base. They apologized to Buckeye Nation and the Ohio State Board of Trustees. This press conference was a train wreck from start to finish. Nobody seemed sincere. Urban Meyer, he sat there the entire time looking straight-faced and angry. I mean, the way he looked like he was the one that had been done wrong. You know, with the look on his face and his demeanor, his manner, you would have sworn he was the one that had been abused in this situation. And I'm not, exaggerating that at all. One of the things that got me, it was in his statement, Urban Meyer expressed loyalty to Zach Smith's grandpa, Earl Bruce, who, of course, mentored Urban Smith from the Ohio State coaching tree. So he felt a sense of loyalty to Earl Bruce. And in a way, I guess that caused him to overlook some of the things that Zach Smith did. On a human side, okay, not that I agree with it, but I can understand how it happens, because we all have that tendency to look over the discretions of somebody who may be in a close association of somebody who helped us get where we're at or looked out for us at an early point in our lives. And whoever wrote that statement that Urban Meyer whoever wrote that statement that Urban Meyer read in a very monotone and emotionless voice, whoever wrote that statement, they should be ashamed of themselves. Urban Meyer should be ashamed of himself. Gene Smith should be ashamed of himself. The thing is, Urban Meyer kept reiterating that he wished he knew more and he didn't know this and he didn't know that. I mean, there were incidents with Zach Smith from 2009, which is back in Urban Meyer's Florida days. There were incidents down there that supposedly Urban Meyer didn't know about. All of this went on in the past, and as close as these two dudes were, and supposedly Urban Meyer didn't know. Zach Smith was not fired until July 23rd, 2018, but there were incidents going back with this dude as far back as 2009. The only reason you and I both know, the only reason why Zach Smith was fired in the first place is because this story got legs and it got bigger and it captured a lot of people's attention. Had this story not been broke by Brett McMurphy, who used to work for ESPN, had he not broke this story, Zach Smith would still be on Ohio State's coaching roster. Nothing would have happened in this situation. That's the sickening part right there. You know, BS like this is a big reason. It's a big part of the reason why women who are in domestic violence situations, it's a big part of the reason why they don't say anything, because they feel like, you know, when an end result happens like this, it basically tells them that we don't care. This is a big reason why domestic violence victims don't feel more inclined to tell people that there's something seriously wrong at home because of end results like this. When we've shown that we would rather protect somebody who's part of in this instance, who's part of a college sports organization, who's a big winner, who brings a lot of money into the organization. We've shown time and time again, you know, a willingness to protect these kinds of people and basically dismiss the words of these young women who are dealing with something extremely traumatic, something that a young lady or a woman, period, should never have to deal with in her life. You know, the frustrating thing about this, you know, and still staying with Ohio State, back in 2011, they forced Jim Tressel out of the program entirely after the tattoo scandal, with Ohio State football players trading football memorabilia for discounts on tattoos. They forced the coach out for something which to me was not really a big deal. You know, multiple players from that team were suspended 4 and 5 games because they got a discount on tattoos. Todd Gurley over at UGA, if you remember that situation, he was suspended 4 games for accepting more than $3,000 for autographs. See, this is what I don't understand. A player can get 4 or 5 games for selling autographs or trading merchandise for tattoos, but a coach and an athletic director covers up domestic violence and they get a tap on the wrist, because this is not something where they just, you know, they were kept in the dark about this and they didn't know. No, they deliberately covered this up. Urban Meyer lied. And then in one part of the press conference, the president says he didn't intentionally mislead them. When was the last time you heard of somebody unintentionally lying? I know for me, anytime I've ever told a lie, or anytime I've ever, stretched the truth or whatever, anytime I've ever told a lie or fibbed, however you want to say it, anytime I've ever done that, there was some plotting and some planning that went into that. I plotted and planned the original lie. I plotted and planned how I was going to cover up the lie on top of that to cover up the original lie. I plotted and planned out the entire thing. Now, in some instances, it didn't work, especially when I was a kid growing up and my parents found out about it and they put a belt to my behind. But that's what happens when you get caught in a lie. You get punished. Urban Meyer was not punished. You know, and the thing about it is, with this punishment, with this suspension, quote unquote, Urban Meyer will still be able to coach the team through the week. He just won't be able to do so on the sideline at game time. And you know, with the advancements in technology, you can't tell me that Urban Meyer is not going to be orchestrating stuff from home with his assistant coaches. You can't tell me he's not going to be able to. You can't tell me he's not going to do that. If this was any other coach in college football, he would have been fired. Period. No coach, no other coach in college football, with the exception of maybe Nick Saban or somebody, no coach in college football would have survived a scandal like this. Because in this situation, Courtney Smith told Urban Meyer's wife, Shelly Smith, what was going on. She sent Shelly Smith pictures of what was going on. It even got so bad, Shelly Smith was even so concerned that she called the cops to see if there was anything that could be done at that particular time in the situation. And then towards the end of it all, Urban Meyer and his wife, Shelly, told the police that they did not feel Courtney Smith was credible. Don't know how that happened, but that's basically what they told the police in one of these instances. If Urban Meyer had a bad record on the football field, he would be out of a job today. But when you have a 73-8 record, 1 national championship, 2 Big Ten championships, you get a tap on the wrist. And that's the unfortunate thing. We've seen this time and again with big schools, Baylor, Michigan State, Penn State. We've seen this time and time again with some unfortunate situations or corruption going on. They try to cover it up, but you would think these schools would figure out by now that what's done in the dark is eventually going to come to the light. You can only cheat and lie and cover up something for so long before eventually karma has the last word, and eventually all of it gets brought out to the top. All of it gets brought out in the wash. So I don't understand, what these other schools and organizations, I don't understand what they're not learning from when they see these other schools going through it. What's not soaking in? But this just really upsets me, man. Now I don't have kids, but if this was my daughter, I would have been ready to kill Zach Smith. And as any reasonable father would. I would have been ready to inflict as much harm as possible, as humanly possible on this man. Any reasonable father wants to protect his daughter. And that's what I don't understand. How can these people sleep at night dealing out these kinds of punishment? Can they not imagine if that was their child that was going through something like that? Can they not imagine if that was their daughter, their sister, their cousin, their mom, getting beat on by the man that's supposed to be her protector, by the man that she walked down the aisle with, that vowed to protect her heart and, through thick and thin and sickness and health and all this? What man wouldn't want to protect his female? I got female friends that I feel bad for when I see situations like this, because even though they may not be going through something like this, the fact that, basically with situations like this, we're telling women that, the things that they are dealing with are not that important. What did we learn in this situation? Well, we learned that money overrules morals when it comes to winning in college sports. And we've seen that time and again. So to be honest, as upset as I am about this, I'm not that surprised. Yes, Ohio State, let's make a tough statement on these kids for getting tattoos and accepting cash for autographs. But let's let this coach take the easy way out, because he brings millions and millions of dollars to the program through his football program. Actually, you know what? Let me rephrase that. The coach himself is only part of the equation that brings in this money. It's these universities make money off of these football players' backs and their bodies, and then they have the nerve to turn around and tell these student athletes that they can't make any money. But it's impossible for these kids to work because all their time is devoted to honing their craft. So what are these student athletes supposed to do? I mean, we've heard the argument about, should student athletes be paid? There's an argument to be made either way, depending on how you feel about the situation. Courtney Smith told Urban Meyer's wife she was being abused. Courtney Smith sent Urban Meyer's wife pictures of the scratches and bruises from the abuse. And yet somehow, some way, Urban Meyer didn't know anything about the instances of abuse, or about some of them. He said he overlooked a lot of them. Said he had a soft spot in his heart for Zach Smith. And, like I said, the human aspect of that, when we have a soft spot in for somebody for whatever reason, we tend to overlook a lot of the things that they do. But even though you may have overlooked some of it, you didn't overlook all of it. I'm not buying that. But the part that really got me with this press conference is the fact that nobody even brought this young lady's name up until the end of the press conference, and the press conference was a little bit over 25 minutes. Nobody even brought this young lady's name up until an ESPN reporter stood up at the end and asked Urban Meyer if he had anything to say to Courtney Smith. And his response was, "I'm sorry that we're in this situation." We. Like, it wasn't you going through that situation. It wasn't you being abused. It wasn't you being beat on. But I'm sorry we're in this situation. No, you're sorry because your cover-up didn't work. And then there's been reports that he deleted text messages from his phone, going back to a year, and all kinds of stuff. And I'm just like, man, This is almost just as bad as how the NFL handled the Ray Rice situation back in 2014. You know, the only reason why Ray Rice wasn't in the league past that year is because the outcry that came about when that tape was released, and they kept showing it repeatedly on network television. I mean, that tape was everywhere. You couldn't escape seeing what Ray Rice did to his wife in the elevator, and it was a horrific thing. But the only reason why Ray Rice is out of the NFL today is because the outcry that came behind that, is because the NFL's attempt to cover that up did not work. You know, the outrage after that, it was so big that nobody would touch him. I mean, he was untouchable, and as a result, he's out of the league. But, you know, again, that's another case where if things would have went the way the NFL wanted it to go in that instance, nobody would have found out. If things would have went the way Urban Meyer and his staff wanted it to go in this instance, nobody would have found out. So what exactly did we learn from this situation? That winning is everything, the right thing means nothing, and money overrules morals in college sports. No, money overrules morals in this country, period. We see that throughout the entire spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're talking about sports, politics, industry, whatever you're talking about. In this country, the United States of America, money overrules morals, no matter where you look. So when you look at it like that, are we really that surprised? Moving on with the lowest row, Paxton Lynch was booed as he took the field about a week and a half ago against the Chicago Bears in Denver. And this is a new low for Paxton Lynch, who was a former first-round pick. You know, the thing is, the Denver Broncos were supposed to be Paxton Lynch's team right now. This was supposed to be Paxton Lynch at the helm, at the quarterback spot in Denver, Colorado. But on the flip side, Paxton Lynch is officially a bust. And it's extremely unfortunate because now when Paxton Lynch was drafted in 2016, I said from the jump that I didn't see what John Elway saw, but, you know, John Elway had proved me wrong before with the Peyton Manning deal because I wasn't for sure how that was going to turn out, you know, and he had proved me wrong plenty of times when it came to talent. I mean, that's what he gets paid to do, is evaluate football talent and sign them to the best deal possible, yada, yada, yada. Now, at the time, I didn't see what John Elway saw, but I'm like, okay, you know what? He's one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game, so I figured, you know, maybe I just wasn't seeing it. And now, fast forward to 2018, the Denver Broncos should have never had to go out and get Case Keenum. You know, because think about the Broncos quarterback situation. If Paxton Lynch works out the way the team and everybody else planned for him to work out. You know, Case Keenum went undrafted in 2013. Chad Kelly was Mr. Irrelevant last year in 2017, and he's already beat Paxton Lynch on the depth chart for the number 2 quarterback spot. Matter of fact, Chad Kelly is starting for the Broncos in their last preseason game this week against the Arizona Cardinals, because generally that's what happens. All the backups and the reserves, they basically played the majority of the last game, if not all of it. So Case Keenum's not even seeing the field as a starter. So think about that for a second. Case Keenum didn't even get drafted in 2013. He's the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos right now. Chad Kelly was the last pick in the draft in 2017. He's number 2 right behind Case Keenum. And a first-round pick who the Broncos traded up to get just 2 years ago is on the outside looking in at the number 3 quarterback spot. But hindsight is 2020. So when you look at it, are we really that surprised if you consider the road that's basically led up to now with the quarterback spot in Denver? Because Trevor Siemian was a 7th-round pick, and he beat out Paxton Lynch in 2016 and 2017. Even Brock Osweiler, and y'all know how I feel about him, even he got plenty of playing time over Paxton Lynch last year. Now, if you really look at this, the team is saying Paxton Lynch is not committed to the offense. He's not staying late to watch film. He's the last one in and the first one out. These are the qualities that you expect to see from a quarterback, from an NFL quarterback. It's the little things that make or break a leader. And Paxton Lynch is showing all the qualities of not being a leader at all, which is what you need your quarterback to be. It's been reported that this benching is the Broncos' last-ditch efforts to wake Paxton Lynch up. But to be honest with you, man, if you're having to go through all of this with a guy who's coming into his 3rd year, because generally when a football player is coming into a 3rd year, especially a quarterback, that's generally around the time when they should be getting ready to enter their prime, if they're not already in it. But if you're having to do all of this with a guy in his third year, then he's already gone. He's not going to get it. At least not in Denver. Now, it could be a situation where Paxton Lynch has to go to another city and get a change of scenery, and maybe that's the thing that wakes him up. Some guys, they have to hit rock bottom. Some guys have to be embarrassed to the point where they have no choice but to switch up their ways if this is what they truly want to do with their life. Which, to make it to the NFL level, I mean, you have to have had some kind of commitment to even get this far. So, but if the Broncos are having to do all this to get Paxton Lynch to wake up, to serve as some kind of alarm, it's not going to work. I'm sorry. I don't see it. If he can't motivate himself to do the things that he needs to do to be really good to great in the NFL by now, he's not going to do it. So with all that being said, it's a wrap. Paxton Lynch is a bust as far as the Denver Broncos are concerned. I remember watching part of this game, and I remember when he walked on the field, and from the minute he set foot on the field, some of the fans were booing him. And I mean, it was audible. I mean, this was not just a few people were booing. No, it was loud enough that even the commentator said something about it. Now, when that happened, some fans didn't take too kindly to fans of the home team booing a member of their own squad. And to a degree, I agree. I get it. I really do. It's not cool to boo your own players. But you got to remember, the Denver Broncos and every other NFL team charge ungodly prices for these tickets, preseason included. They charge ungodly prices for parking. They charge ungodly prices for concessions. So, if these squads expect fans to shell out their hard-earned money, hey, you can boo all you want. Booing is not my thing personally. But if this man over here on the side of me has paid his hard-earned money that he's worked hard for and spent it to come see this team, and the team puts out a poor product or a player performs poorly, if that's what he wants to do, he go right at it. I mean, it's not illegal. He's not hurting anybody. I mean, he might be hurting that player's feelings, but at the end of the day, it's not illegal to boo. And, I saw some people on Twitter and social media. I saw some fans talking about, oh, don't be booing your fans and show some class and da-da-da-da-da-da, and we're better than that. Be better than that. Whoop-de-whoop-de-woo. Man, listen, that's part of the experience of professional sports. No, that's part of the experience of sports, but in this situation, that's part of being a professional athlete. Sometimes fans are going to boo. And when fans pay the kind of money that fans are expected to pay for NFL tickets and to go to these games and spend the amount of time that it takes to get to the stadium, to get into the stadium, past security, and then if you get a little hungry. Matter of fact, when I went to a Broncos game back in 2013, I went to get a hot chocolate, and I remember this game. This was December 2013 when they played the Tennessee Titans. I remember that game because it was 6 degrees that day, and that reminds me I will never, ever, ever go to a cold weather game in an outside stadium unless it's the playoffs or unless by some means a Super Bowl is played there and I'm covering it for whatever reason or something like that. Outside of that, you ain't going to catch me at no cold weather game. I'm sorry. I'll never do that again. But anyway, I went and got a hot chocolate. And this hot chocolate wasn't even that big, man. It was maybe 8 or 9 ounces. And they charged me $10 for that hot chocolate. So when the NFL is charging these kinds of prices on concessions because they know you can't leave the stadium, when they charge this kind of money, hey, fans can boo. You can boo all you want. I really don't care. Boo all you want. Because then, too, on top of that, these teams have no issue in asking citizens of NFL cities to pay for the stadiums that they want to build. Then if the citizens and the city choose not to do it, these teams tend to pack up and leave. And to see the perfect example of that, all you got to do is look at the Oakland Raiders. That's exactly why they're leaving and going to Las Vegas, because Oakland wouldn't give them a stadium. Oakland wouldn't pay for their stadium. And the thing about it is the NFL is a non-profit organization by the way that they work the tax code. And they're a multi-billion-dollar organization. These teams and the NFL itself make more than enough money to pay for their own stadiums. So if you're going to ask fans to pay for your stadiums, pay these ungodly ticket prices, pay these high parking prices and these high concession prices, then by all means, fans have every right to boo a product that is not meeting their expectations, period. Man, it's crazy. Speaking of the Raiders, it's been reported that they have put Khalil Mack, their franchise defensive player, on the trade block. This is insane, and this is a dumb move by the Raiders, in my opinion, if this is in fact true. But apparently they don't want to pay him the money that he's looking for, and, the business side of the NFL, it is what it is. And I really think this report might have some legs because John Gruden got to the Raiders in January or February, one of them, and he hadn't talked to Khalil Mack basically since then. That's been 6 going on 7 months ago. So when a coach blocks out your best defensive player, well, arguably your best player on the team, period, that tells you a lot about his vision for this player moving forward. But, this is kind of crazy because reports say that Khalil Mack is looking to pass up Von Miller's $19.5 million a year salary. Now, at some point, the defensive player's salary bubble is got to bust because a defensive player is generally not going to be paid like a quarterback. He's just not. No matter how valuable he is to that defense, an NFL team is always going to look at a quarterback as their number one priority. All you got to do is look at the way quarterbacks are paid. Look at what Jimmy Garoppolo got out in San Francisco after playing 7 games. Look at what Kirk Cousins got from the Minnesota Vikings. They gave him a fully guaranteed contract, the first one in NFL history. Look at what the Broncos gave Case Keenum, who up before last year had really just been a journeyman quarterback. NFL teams will always value a quarterback more so than anybody else on the team. So a defensive player, no matter how good he is, they're not going to be paid like a quarterback. They're not going to be paid quite as much as a quarterback. I mean, they're just not. Now, you have an exception like Von Miller, where the stars lined up at just the right time. Von Miller must have been living right in 2015 because the stars lined up just right for him because he was coming into a contract year. He had a heck of a season in 2015. He wrecked the Panthers in the Super Bowl, and then he turned around and he won Super Bowl 50 MVP. All of that was in a contract year. So with an exception like that, now he's getting a $19.5 million salary. Case Keenum is being paid $18 million a year. But that's very rare where you'll see a defensive player getting more money than his quarterback. That's an anomaly almost in today's NFL. So generally, a defensive guy is not going to get past $20 million into that quarterback kind of money. Now, Khalil Mack has 40.5 sacks in his career, and he's not quite as good as Von, and that's no shade. That's no shade. Don't come for me, Raiders fans. But he's a close second. Like, I would have to say Von Miller 1A, Khalil Mack 1B. Like, they're that close. But even though he might not be quite on Von Miller's level, he's definitely the best player on Oakland's team. But, I'm not surprised by this development, not one bit, because this is classic Chucky. This is classic John Gruden, letting folks know who's running the team in Oaktown this year. One of the squads that Khalil Mack is rumored to be traded to is the Green Bay Packers. This would be huge for the Green Bay Packers if they were somehow, some way able to pull this off. Because the Packers, they're known to build through the draft and they're known to try to build their team organically and then turn around and be pretty quiet when it comes to free agency. Now, they've kind of switched that up with the new GM, Brian Gutekunst, this year. So Brian Gut, he's came in. He's kind of made some waves in free agency. He didn't do everything that Aaron Rodgers would have liked when he let his best friend and his go-to guy, Jordy Nelson, go. Now, A-Rod didn't like that. But when you look at Green Bay's defense, outside of Clay Matthews, I mean, who's really a big impact player on their front seven? And speaking of Clay Matthews, I mean, he's had a down last few years. But the question is, now that's one question for Green Bay, but also on the flip side, you have to ask, does Green Bay want to give up multiple first-round picks and make Khalil Mack the highest paid player at his position? Because that's basically what's going to have to happen in order for something like this to go through. In order for a trade of this magnitude to happen, they're going to have to give up multiple first-round picks. Now, if I were them, if I was the Green Bay Packers, I would absolutely consider it. Now, I can't say I would go ahead and do it because they still have Aaron Rodgers who's wanting a brand-new contract. You're going to have to pay him. You're going to have to pay Aaron Rodgers at least – man, you're going to have to pay him at least $25 million a year. I mean, and I'm kind of hesitant to say that because You know, Kirk Cousins up in Minnesota in the same division, he's making $28 million a year. So you know you're gonna have to give Aaron Rodgers a good 4 or 5 year contract on his deal, and that contract's gonna have to eclipse $100 million with incentives and everything else. As far as the guarantee, God knows how much you're gonna have to pay Aaron Rodgers, because he is the best quarterback in the National Football League. So as much as I'm inclined to say go for it for the Packers, but they still got to pay A-Rod. And with that, like I said, you know he ain't going to be cheap. But at the same time, Aaron Rodgers, he's in the prime of his career. Khalil Mack would give them the kind of defensive centerpiece that they haven't had really since the days of Charles Woodson, back when they won the Super Bowl in the 2010 season. So that's one side of it. Then you also have to consider the other teams and the other defenses in the NFC. You got the Vikings. They can come get you. You got the Eagles. They can come get you. You got the Rams. Their defense can come get you. The Falcons. You got all these defensive you got all these squads in the NFC who have strong to great defenses. And then you also have teams in the division. They're improving. I already mentioned the Vikings. So you got the Vikings that you got to deal with in the division. You also have the Lions and the Bears. They've both improved. The Bears, they had a top 10 defense last year. The Lions, they're getting a little bit better on offense. So you're going to have to give Aaron Rodgers a little bit more to work with, because it seems like in the past, Aaron Rodgers got kind of that Peyton Manning treatment where, you know, we'll give him what he needs to work with on the offense, but we're kind of just going to let the defense, we'll just deal with what we got. You know, in 2006, when the Colts won the Super Bowl, the Indianapolis Colts, they had the worst defense in the league. They had the 32nd ranked defense in the National Football League. But they had an all-time great at the quarterback spot. They had Dominic Rhodes in the running game. They had Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne out there as their receiver. So they had all-time Hall of Fame talent. They had Dallas Clark at tight end. So they had some great talent at all these offensive positions, but they didn't really have anything to deal with on the defensive side of the ball. And Aaron Rodgers is kind of dealing with that same thing. You know, people like to, you know, there's another debate that goes on in the NFL as to whether or not Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback in the National Football League. Some people do the GOAT argument with both of these guys. But when you look at Tom Brady, I think last year was the first time that he's been to the Super Bowl when he didn't have a top 10 defense on the other side of the ball. All the other times, you know, because Bill Belichick was a defensive guru, all the other times that New England got to the Super Bowl, they had at least a top 10 defense. Aaron Rodgers has not had a top 10 defense in quite a while. I don't even know if Green Bay had a top 10 defense when they won the Super Bowl that year. And then when it comes to offensive play, Green Bay is very one-dimensional on offense because they really don't have a running game. Green Bay's leading rusher last year rushed for a little over 500 yards. That's their leading rusher, a little over 500 yards. Russell Wilson in Seattle had more rushing yards last year than Green Bay's leading rusher. So that tells you that Green Bay is very one-dimensional on offense. They had 8 straight seasons in the playoffs up until last season, of course, with Aaron Rodgers and his broken collarbone. Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback in the league, yes, but at the end of the day, it's not going to do you any good to have a quarterback and an offense who can score at will, run up the scoreboard, and put up 40 points at will, and your defense is going to turn around and allow the opposing team to score 41 or 42. So Aaron Rodgers needs pieces on defense. Now, they went out, they got Mike Pettin as their defensive coordinator. They got Muhammad Wilkerson to shore up the defensive line. So they did make a few improvements on defense. This right here, if they were to add Khalil Mack to that defense, Mike Pettin is a great defensive coordinator. Muhammad Wilkerson, he can eat up space in the middle. If they were to go out and get Khalil Mack, man, he's a premier pass rusher in the NFL, and that would be a big piece in Green Bay. If Green Bay were to make this move, they're already playoff contenders just because they have number 12 back there. But if they were to make this move, they could be a legitimate Super Bowl contender. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen with this situation. I'm definitely keeping my eyes on this one. Mental health is an important issue that has really gained a lot of attention in daily conversation, and rightfully so. The good thing about mental health is we're starting to hear about it a lot more. We're becoming more aware of it. And the stigma surrounding it has really started to come down, and that's an important part of raising awareness about this subject, because this is something that affects many, many people. In some instances, it's affecting people that we have no idea that they're dealing with it. Well, professional athletes are no exception. Jackie McMullen of ESPN wrote a great article. You have got to read this article by Jackie McMullen. She wrote a great article after sitting down with Kevin Love, who opened up about him seeking professional help with his mental health. And here's my 2 cents on this issue. Being an adult, period, is stressful. We all know that. But being a pro athlete is extremely stressful. And before you roll your eyes, I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of folks like to think that being a pro athlete is easy because you get paid a lot of money. You know, you get all this exposure, you get endless opportunity. I get all that. On the surface, it does look easy. And while the money, exposure, and the opportunities, that's awesome, that's simply not always the case with a professional athlete, because these are men and women who deal with stressors and situations that the average person has no idea about. You have to remember, they're dealing with all the demands of the profession. They got to eat right. You got to keep your body right. You're dealing with soreness from working out, soreness from games. You got all the demands of the profession. You got the demands of the game. You got fan requests, media requests, money decisions, dealing with family and friends who sometimes don't mean you any good outside of what you can do for them financially. And you still, on top of that, they still have everyday stuff to deal with. A lot of them have wives, husbands, kids. So they got all that to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So when you factor all that in, it can become very easy for a professional athlete to become overwhelmed. Now, the stigma of mental health keeps a lot of everyday men and women, as well as professional athletes, suffering in silence. And that's one of the things. When I read this article, I was so glad when Kevin Love came out and said what he said. And he admitted that at first he wasn't going to go through with it because, you know, not only do you have the stigma surrounding mental health that people have to deal with, in a professional athlete's case, especially men, they're dealing with, you know, as men, we're taught to keep it in. Don't show emotion. Never let them see you sweat. Even after, you know, you go through that first heartbreak with the girl, oh, man, don't let her see you sweat. You know, when you go out, you know, don't go out looking any kind of way. Don't let her know she got to you. Don't let her know she took that L. Don't let her know that you took that L and she hurt your feelings and da-da-da-da-da. Don't show emotion. Don't let it, you know, hold it in, man. You got it. You good. So from a very young age, men are taught to really kind of suppress their emotions. We're really kind of taught not to let people know that they got to us, not to let people know that we took that L, not to let people know that our feelings are hurt. And one interesting piece in this article pointed out that the NBA Players Union, they want to keep mental health treatment confidential. But so when I saw that, I was like, well, why is that so important? Then I kept reading and it said Rockets assistant coach John Lucas, he estimates that nearly 40% of NBA players are dealing with mental health issues from things like ADHD, bipolar, anxiety, depression, but yet only around 5% of NBA players are seeking treatment. And those two numbers really kind of jumped at me because I never would have guessed that 40% of NBA players I never would have guessed there was that many players from any sport dealing with mental health issues. That's an astounding number. And at first glance, I really had to go back and make sure I was looking at that. So when they asked him, you know, if he felt like he was exaggerating that number, his answer was not in the least. And in the same article, DeMar DeRozan, he did a little interview for it. He had a great point in there where he said, you know, people say all the time, what are you depressed about? You can buy anything that you want. He says, I wish everyone in the world was rich so they would realize money isn't everything. And that's the thing that I think that's the one misconception that people have with professional athletes. And another thing for professional athletes, people have to understand, not all professional athletes are just multimillionaires getting paid just buckets and buckets of money. You got guys, depending on how the league is set up, you got guys that may only make 6 figures a year. I say only, I mean, you're still fortunate, but not every professional athlete is making multi-million dollars. I mean, especially if you look at like the NFL, With the NFL, you hear about the guys that make all the money with, these big contracts and everything else. But generally, if you go look at an NFL roster and see what these guys are making, you'll see that maybe between 4 and 7 players on an NFL roster are getting superstar type of money. Not every player is making multi-million-dollar contracts. So, at that point right there, DeMar DeRozan made a great point. And then on top of that, when you're dealing with depression and anxiety and mental health and things like that, no amount of money or material things can cure that. I mean, the Bible itself says in Mark 8:36, "For what shall it profit a man to gain the entire world and lose his own soul?" Because money isn't everything. You can't take any of this stuff with you when you leave. We all got a dying day. You can't take any of this stuff with you when you leave this earth. And elite athletes, especially men, like I said earlier, we're expected to hold it in. We're expected to man up. We're expected to deal with it. And one thing that people don't look at when it comes to professional athletes, a lot of time when a professional athlete is dealing with something like mental health issues, they handle it a lot like they try to do with injuries. A lot of time they won't say anything because they're looking at the fact, well, man, if I bring this up, I don't know my status on the roster. I might get cut. I might get traded. I might lose endorsements. They think about all the negative things that could happen because of the stigma that surrounds something like mental health. So a lot of times they're more apt to hold it in than what the average person on the street would be. So with this piece, man, I loved it because, man, it really gave me an insight as to what a pro athlete does. And Kevin Love's, his part was amazing because he talked about the time when he basically quit. He had to quit a game because he had an anxiety attack in the middle of the game. He talked about how some of his teammates, they gave him the side eye. Some of them thought he was faking it. They didn't trust him. They thought he quit on the team. I mean, it gave great insight to the other side of what being a professional athlete can be. Now, you take this kind of mentality with holding it in, don't say anything, just, suck it up and deal with it or walk it off in some cases. You take that mentality, mix in all the pressures of pro sports, mix in the celebrity that comes along with being a professional athlete. You mix all that in and you have a recipe for trouble. Another part of this article that really caught my eye, though, is NBA owners want full access to a player's mental health records. This particular point I'm against. And I'm against this because these players have got to have some kind of aspect of privacy and confidentiality. If for nothing else, but for the player to feel comfortable in going to seek treatment and discuss it with somebody. Because these dudes' medical reports, they're already on display to coaches, players, fans. A lot of people already have access to their medical records. That's how we find out about their injuries. That's how we find out about how long they're supposed to be out in rehab. That's how we find out about their surgery info. A lot of their medical information is already out there at public disposal. So why does anybody need to know if an athlete is suffering with mental health issues? I really don't. I'm totally against that. Now, on one hand, I get it. These owners, they have millions of dollars invested in these athletes. So on that one hand, I look at it like, okay, if I'm an owner, if I'm investing, if I have millions of dollars invested in this athlete or these athletes as part of my business, then yeah, I there's a part of me that will want to know as much as possible. But at the same time, does an owner really need to know if an athlete's suffering from depression? Do they really need access to this athlete's records when it comes to mental health? Because now, when this came out, the owner's trying to spin it like, oh, this will be beneficial for the players. This will be great for us because we can try to help get players treatment and this and that and the other. So it's going to be beneficial for everybody involved. They did the exact same thing that rich owners, NBA or professional sports owners, always do. They tried to spin it as a positive. But you and I both know that eventually, somewhere down the line, they're going to use that information against the player, especially when it comes to the contract negotiation time. They already do that with their medical injuries. They already do that with the player's injury history. So, at some point, they would try to use that against the player for leverage. So, from that aspect, that's another aspect as to why I'm against a player's mental health records being accessible to an NBA owner, because we already know eventually the road that would lead to. All right, it's time for I'm in, I'm out. I love this segment. Now, unless you've been living under a rock when it comes to the NFL, you know the big story with the Cleveland Browns and Baker Mayfield and Tyrod Taylor and the quarterback position, and Cleveland Browns, they look like they're the Cinderella team or one of the Cinderella teams of 2018. So I'm really excited about what's going on over there in Cleveland. Like, I like a lot of the moves that the Browns have made. But one thing that's really kind of starting to kind of get me is the fact that people keep asking Coach Hue Jackson about Baker Mayfield starting. And by the way, Hue Jackson is starting to get very irritated by questions about Baker Mayfield starting. And I'm 100% all the way in on this one, because there's really no need for Cleveland to start Baker Mayfield right now. Tyrod Taylor hasn't done anything to warrant being benched. Tyrod Taylor hasn't done anything to warrant a quarterback change right now. Now, he gave me a little bit of a scare the other night in their game against Philly, when he landed kind of awkwardly on his wrist, and I was like, oh man, because I like Tyrod Taylor. I really like the way he conducts himself. He's a mild-mannered dude. He's a good dude. I like him as a football player. He protects the ball, doesn't really turn the ball over. He led Buffalo to their first playoff appearance in 17 years last year. And if you've been following the Browns on Hard Knocks, you really kind of see not only the kind of quarterback Tyrod Taylor is, but you see the kind of dude he is. Because this is a dude who shows up at the facility at 5:30 in the morning every morning. This is a dude who stays late to watch film. He stays late after practice, running routes with receivers and, doing all the little things that it takes for a quarterback to be great in the National Football League. So from that aspect, I'm like, dude, why does everybody keep asking the question about Baker Mayfield starting? Why is it such a hard concept for people to understand that, look, Baker Mayfield can really take this year. He can learn. He can become a sponge this year. He can learn all the little things, the ins and outs of being a professional, the ins and outs of being a great professional NFL quarterback. Because we all know eventually Baker Mayfield is going to start. Tyrod Taylor ain't dumb. He knows eventually Baker Mayfield is going to replace him. Teams don't draft a guy at the number one spot just to sit him for too long. But at the end of the day, Cleveland is in a unique position because they have a quarterback that's like, okay, you know what? We're trying to turn the culture around this year. We're really trying to get things turned around. So Tyrod Taylor, he's the perfect guy. He can come in here. He can kind of stabilize the position, help stabilize the locker room, help change the mentality. Then once this year is over, then you give the reins over to Baker Mayfield. Because at the end of the day, Tyrod Taylor, he knows he's not the forever starter, but at the same time, he's trying to put good stuff on tape for the other 31 teams, because Tyrod Taylor will have no shortage of suitors after this season is over. You can bet that. And look, I get it. I understand the media has to ask questions and Baker Mayfield is the hot, sexy storyline. I get all that. And as somebody who works in the media, I'll just be honest. We can be so annoying at times, and I'm just going to put it out there because sometimes, with these repeated questions and, asking the same question a different way and, little strategies like that can get on your nerves. And this is one of those times because it's like every time I turn around, somebody's asking Hue Jackson, when is Baker Mayfield going to start? When is this? And he's repeatedly said Tyrod Taylor's the starter going into the season. I mean, what part of that do they not understand? I mean, it's not that hard to comprehend. This is not a situation like Sam Darnold in New York or Josh Allen in Buffalo where you really don't have anybody behind them that's really taking the reins. Well, I say that Teddy Bridgewater has played exponentially over in New York, but that in and of itself is a unique situation because, they had him as insurance just in case Sam Darnold wasn't ready, but now Sam Darnold's ready, but also Teddy Bridgewater's playing really well, so now they're letting him up his trade value. So that's a different situation. But on the flip side, though, everybody's asking when is Baker Mayfield going to start, but what happens if you put Baker Mayfield in and he struggles? This ain't college. This is a different ball game with the National Football League. These dudes are bigger, they're faster, and they're stronger. And what happens if Baker Mayfield comes in there and he struggles? Because as good as he was in college, he was great in college. He's still got a learning curve that he's going to have to conquer in the National Football League. These dudes move faster, whereas in college you could get away with a lot of stuff in college because the competition is not top-notch like it is in the NFL. So he's still going to have to learn and adjust to the game. But what happens if you get in there, you put him in there, he struggles, and then by the nature of the game, you're going to yank him out and put Tyrod Taylor back in there? Well, now you're messing with his confidence. And anytime you're dealing with an athlete or a person, period, anytime you mess with a person's confidence, it's extremely hard for them to get it back. Now, that's not to say they can't get it back, because they can. But why go down that road, or why take a risk in going down that road when you don't really have to? You're not in a position where you have to do that. Hue Jackson needs wins, like immediately, because the Browns have only won one game in the last 2 years. Hue Jackson needs wins, and he feels like Tyrod Taylor is the best quarterback right now that's best suited to give him that. And he's right. The NFL says no changes will be made to the helmet rule despite input from coaches, players, and officials. I am all the way out on this rule. Like, I'm over this helmet rule. I'm over it. I'm over it. OVER, all caps, over this rule. Now, the spirit and the intent of this rule is in the right place because it's trying to, make the game safer. I get all that. But the enforcement of this rule has been trash. Absolutely trash. And the NFL, for whatever reason, they choose to keep their heads in the sand and they hope this all works itself out. And in the process, they're listening to absolutely no one. Not even the people that this rule affects the most. Players, coaches, officials. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. NFL, please take a step back, be objective, and look at this entire deal. Dean Blandino told some people at Fox Sports that this rule was basically made by some owners who were basically in a room and they were reacting to this billion-dollar lawsuit that's brought on by the CTE issue. And this is generally what happens when you have a league or organization like the NFL who tends to be reactive instead of proactive. Because by the time that they do anything, they overreact. You can only make the game so safe. There's only so many things you can do to improve the safety of the game. These are grown men running full speed at each other and colliding with each other on purpose. Like, there's only so much you can do to make the game safer. I mean, you can't legislate how a dude's going to fall. You can't legislate, the way a quarterback falls to the ground, because there's another crazy rule where they have where the defender drives the quarterback in the ground and some other kind of craziness. I don't know what the NFL's doing. There's only so much you can legislate when it comes to safety in the game. And, there are a lot of the plays that's being called with this helmet rule enforcement. There are plays where guys are leading with their shoulders, which is what guys are supposed to do. I mean, there was even some plays where the offensive player bent his head down and hit the defensive player with the crown of his head, and the defensive player got flagged for it. Like, that's the kind of stuff that's turning people off to the game. And at the end of the day, the average NFL play is only 3 or 4 seconds in length. The average NFL play is only 3 or 4 seconds. You have guys running at world-class speed. You got offensive linemen and defensive linemen pushing against each other at will. You have receivers running all these different routes, these dig routes and wheel routes and, wide routes and go routes and flank routes. You got receivers running all these different routes, going all these different directions. You got running backs who sometimes break out of the backfield. You got all this movement going on. You got DBs flying around covering receivers. You got safeties back trying to protect the top of the defense. You got all this stuff going on in this short amount of time. You got these dudes flying around the field at world-class speed. It's too much going on in real time for refs to be able to officiate this kind of rule the way it's worded in real time. It's just almost impossible. And let's just be honest. People tune in part to football for the collisions. I mean, nobody likes to see a guy get hurt, but let's not kid ourselves. People watch football in part for the collisions. If you don't believe me, pay attention to how the crowd reacts the next time a dude gets lit up. Pay attention to how you react the next time a dude gets lit up. People tune in part for the collisions. Football is a violent sport, and I get trying to make it safer. I get that. I'm not against that. But part of me wants to know, like, maybe there's some way where the NFL should invest in better technology when it comes to padding, better helmet technology, things like that. Let's look at that also as well. I mean, there's always room for improvement, but as far as improvement goes, there's a lot of room for improvement on this rule. And maybe, the thing about it is, I said on the last podcast, the NFL really needed to take a step back and they need to talk to coaches, players, and officials who this rule is going to affect more. That's really the way they need to go about it. I mean, generally that's what they do, but for whatever reason with this one, they didn't do it. And as a result, the NFL is suffering from a bad case of paralysis by analysis. The Redskins signed Adrian Peterson for the league minimum last week, and he made his 2018 debut in preseason Game 3 against the Denver Broncos on Friday night. I'm all the way in on this one because I love Adrian Peterson. He's not the same guy that he once was, but I love Adrian Peterson. He's a lot of fun to watch. He's an all-time great first ballot Hall of Famer. I love his running style. The dude is just a hard-nosed, downhill, get the fudge out of my way type of runner. Like, I love watching this dude run. Now, he's not the AP of old because he's 33 years old, and at 33 for a running back, that's dinosaur years. But Adrian Peterson still got some good football left in him. And also, the Redskins running back stable is not very good. You still have Samaje Perine, he's injured. The rookie they drafted this year, Darius Geis, he's out for the year with the torn ACL. They got some other guys that have some issues going on. So Adrian Peterson, he might be able to give him a little something. Now, the reservations, of course, with Adrian Peterson are how much does he have left in the tank? And us folks looking on the outside, or us folks on the outside looking in, we may look and see that he doesn't have a whole lot left. But don't tell him that, because Adrian Peterson's he's a bell cow, old school type of running back, meaning he needs 25 or 30 carries a game to really get into a rhythm. Now, me personally, I don't believe he still has that in him, over a long period of time. He might be able to give you that in stretches, maybe, 1 or 2 games at a time. Because if you remember what he did in Arizona last year, he had 2 games where I think the first one he rushed for like 150 something, and then the second game he rushed for like 139. And then he had like 5 bad games in Arizona last year. He had 4 games where he rushed for under 30 yards in 2017 because first New Orleans told him no, then Arizona, they brought him in and they said no. So he's not the player that he once was, and that begs the question of if he goes and he has a big game on a certain Sunday, well, how's he going to perform in the days and weeks after that? Because, his body just can't withhold the kind of beating that it once could. I mean, look at all the hits he's taken over the years. So, that's a fair question in wondering whether or not he can consistently take that kind of punishment. But, he's 40 yards away from passing Jim Brown on the all-time top 10 rushing list. So I would love to see AP get that. And, of course, he will get that. Another question that people really had about this, whether or not it would be a fit, was because Washington runs more of a zone rushing scheme and Adrian Peterson's more of a power runner. So people kind of wondered how that was going to work out because generally when you see that sometimes in the NFL, a lot of times that doesn't work when a team tries to put a power runner into a zone rushing scheme or vice versa. But after watching him Friday against the Broncos, he had 11 carries for 56 yards, which is about 5 yards a carry, a little over, 5 yards and some change a carry. That's still pretty doggone good for a running back, no matter how old they are. So after watching him against the Broncos after watching him against the Broncos on Friday night, I really liked what I saw from Adrian Peterson. So, I don't think he's going to be able to give you 25 or 30 carries a game consistently. But, and if there's a way, I know this is highly unlikely because he's not this kind of runner. But if there's a way that he might even be able to fine-tune his game to where he's getting, between, 12 and 18 carries a game. I know that sounds crazy, but, a lot of times veterans, they do fine-tune their game at the end of their careers to kind of prolong their career. Look at what Larry Fitzgerald did. He kind of fine-tuned his game to play inside the slot, and he's revitalized his career. So maybe Adrian Peterson could do something like that. Again, highly unlikely because he's not that kind of player. But how cool would that be to see something like that? And this week, and this is some bull jive. Man, get this. An anonymous coach called Alabama coach Nick Saban overrated. Says he cheats and he hates Alabama's recruiting process. Now, this anonymous coach went on to say, quote, "If you had the #1 recruiting class in the country every year, you'd win like Nick Saban. He shows up at every single game with a better roster than the team that he's playing," which is what his job is. Anyway, to continue the quote, "If you count cheating and getting the best players in the country as part of running a program, he's the best in the country. It's like saying an NFL coach is the best coach in the league if he gets 25 first-round picks." Whew. So whoever this coach is throwing slugs. And first of all, I'm mad about this whole ordeal because this is forcing me to have to defend Nick Saban, because I'm not the biggest fan of Nick Saban, mostly because of how he talks to some people in some of his press conferences, and he kind of just comes off as very smug and very smart alecky. Although some of those questions, to his credit, some of those questions are dumb, and I get it. You get tired of answering the same questions repeatedly, especially questions that don't make a lot of sense. But that's part of your job as a college coach. So it is what it is. Anyway, this sounds like a coach who's mad just because he can't beat Nick Saban. I mean, how is being the best at recruiting cheating? That's his job. I mean, if you don't want a team to win, well, genius, find a way to beat them. If you don't want a team to beat you in recruiting, well, what should you do? I don't know. Find a way to out-recruit them. I mean, this is the competition business. So you compete to beat a team. You compete to beat them in recruiting. It ain't that hard. I mean, I get tired of hearing these kind of takes by anonymous people and sources, because if you're going to blast somebody like this, and if you're going to accuse somebody of something as serious as cheating the game, if you're going to go out and do something like that, put your name on it. Be about that life, bruh. Because don't go out just throwing slugs. I hate the fact that people can use the term "keep me anonymous" and this, that, and the other, and just use that as a cover to go out and just throw slugs on a dude's name. Like that is ridiculous to me. Because sitting around complaining about how this coach is so good at his job, he must be cheating, that's not going to do anything. I'm not a fan of Alabama, but it's hard to argue with their record throughout this decade of dominance that they have had under Nick Saban. In the last 10 seasons, Nick Saban has had the #1 collective defense, 5 national championships, 6 national championship appearances, and a 66-4 record at home. He's got more national championship titles than he's got at-home losses. Like, that's amazing. I don't care what kind of person he is. I don't care if you like Nick Saban or you hate Nick Saban or you love Nick Saban. I don't care. Those kinds of numbers, that tells you about the greatness of his coaching, period. And when it comes down to recruiting, you can't blame him for being the best recruiter because, with him coaching the way he coaches and with him having the record that he's having, it really ain't that hard for him to get the best recruits, because these kids coming out of high school are making decisions for their next choice, which for the majority of them, they're looking to try to make it to the NFL. So they're looking at the fact of, okay, I get coached by the best coach at the best school to give myself the best chance of going to the NFL. Plus, I get all these national TV games, which gives me even more exposure to potential NFL scouts. I mean, if I'm a high school senior and Nick Saban comes knocking on my door, oh yeah, I'm going to listen. And if I don't listen, my parents are going to make me listen. Like, dude, Nick Saban is the greatest coach of this era. And again, I don't get into the whole greatest of all time arguments, but I'm pretty sure if they had a Mount Rushmore of college football coaches, I'm pretty sure he would be up there with them. he would be up there with the greats. Listen, this Nick Saban is a cheater. This is foolishness. This is not factually correct. Like I said, don't just throw this kind of bull jive out there on somebody's name and not put your name on it. Be about that life. Bring some evidence, bruh. You know, this stuff like this is so dumb. This is foolish. This is petty. This is some straight up bull jive. In today's episode of Kicking It, I finally got around to going to see Equalizer 2. Man, I have been trying to get to see this movie for a while, basically since it came out, because Denzel Washington is my guy. Like, I love Denzel Washington. Him and Will Smith, those are my two favorite actors. Like, anytime somebody asks me who my favorite actor is, it's always a tie. Will Smith, Denzel Washington, period. You know, so I got to go see Equalizer 2, man. If you have not seen Equalizer 2, you got to go see it. And because it's the follow-up to the 2014 film, The Equalizer, and that was one of the best Denzel movies I've seen. Like, I've seen basically every Denzel movie, and Equalizer was one of his best performances. I don't care what anybody says. Equalizer 2 was just as good. And you know, I was really kind of surprised to see Denzel in Equalizer 2 because generally he doesn't get involved in franchise type of projects. I mean, generally with Denzel movies, they're pretty much one and done. They pretty much, you know, they have the movie, then they close it out at the end. So when I saw Equalizer 2, I was like, wow. So, you know, in this movie, I mean, he's basically just like, it's kind of like the first one. The story is kind of like the first one, where he goes and he's righting all these wrongs and he's trying to fill this void in his heart that's been left by a loss that he suffered. Now, I'm not going to tell you the loss that he suffered. I'll let the movie tell you. But the way this story is written and the way the acting and the writing and everything, the way the story is written, the way it's portrayed, and the way that, the twisted kind of way that the story is told about right and wrongs and everything else, whew, man, it's brilliant. Directed by Antoine Fuqua, which I believe this is Denzel and Antoine Fuqua's fourth project together. So, man, so you know, anytime you see those two pair up, it's going to be fire. So if you haven't seen Equalizer 2, go and see Equalizer 2. Check that out. And if you're balling on a budget, this is the perfect time of the year. If you're like me, if you're in between blessings or just cheap, this is the perfect time of the year to ball on a budget and go check out some football games. You got high school football starting up soon. A lot of scrimmages start up this Friday, the 31st. College football, it started as well. So both of those are great avenues where you can go out, you can have a good time for not a lot of money. You have a cheap date. You can take old girl up there to the football game. Then you can hit the Whataburger, IHOP. You have a number of choices that you can hit up after the game. Me personally, after a football game, I like to hit up the IHOP, get me some pancakes, you know, some steak tips, no mushrooms, a little bit of hash browns, and a sweet tea. Yes, 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 Lord. So you got that going on. So this is the best time of year. Football is back. Football is back in full effect. So go support your local high school football programs. Go see future NFL players before they even make it to the college level. So I'm really enjoying everything that's going on with the Undrafted podcast, the changes that's coming to it. We got a lot of big changes coming to the program, coming to the podcast. This rebrand, I'm enjoying it. I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you're enjoying it. Don't forget, you can follow the Undrafted podcast on Instagram at the Undrafted Podcast and on Twitter at the Undrafted Pod. Stay tuned for all the new changes that we got coming. We got a great show for you next week as well. We're going to be talking about more NFL talk, a little bit of NBA stuff, and we're going to be back with some more bull jive next week. So remember, do your best and let God handle the rest. Be blessed.